Welcome to Biz Talk. This is a special coverage of Kickstart 2023. China's economy has had a great start this year. The country's major cities are going all out to kickstart their economies as they pass the COVID-19 peaks. Business delegations are going abroad to negotiate more deals and orders. Today, we are very glad to have representatives from chambers of commerce and industry experts to get you more insights about how Chinese companies can better go abroad. I have four distinguished guests here with me today. Let's welcome Paolo Von Schirach, the president of the Global Policy Institute, Adam Dunnett, Secretary General of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China, Lin Yuqing, Chairman of the Philippine Chinese Chamber of Commerce, and Hongcai, Deputy Director of Economic Policy Commission and the China Association of Policy Sciences. Thank you guys, gentlemen, for joining us. So it's honored we have two representatives from Chambers of Commerce here today. So Mr. Dunnett and Mr. Lin, I want to start with both of you first. What role do you think the local chambers of commerce can play in bringing opportunities to China?
Well, thanks for the question. I'm happy to jump in first. I mean, the real value of chambers of commerce and associations alike is that we provide a platform where we can bring all of the interests of business together in a specific sector or overall. And we can communicate that to officials, to media, to the other broader business community. So we're a great channel for sharing information, both receiving it and feeding it back. And so whether it's promotional opportunities, whether it's regulatory reform, whether it's the challenges or administrative hurdles that companies are facing, if the ultimate goal is to boost trade and investment and economic efficiency in the town or the city or the province, most important is getting access to business information, and that's something that we can do.
And what about Mr. Lin? How do you think, what role can chambers of commerce play in bringing opportunities to the Chinese market?
Yeah, I think in the Philippines, we are one of the biggest chamber of commerce in the Philippines. We under 70 different organizations, and of course we spread out in all parts of the Philippines. And at this point in time, all of us are very eager to really participate in the opening of business now, especially with the ending of the COVID-19 crisis pandemic. And we are looking forward to more, of course, active participation of the local Filipino Chinese and the Chinese counterparts. In the Philippines, you should know that we have 7,100 beautiful islands, and we can really make it a dream for all the Chinese tourists to come here instead of going just to Sanya, whatever. The Philippines has one of the longest coastline also in the world, with all of its white sand beaches. So we are very, very confident, and we are also looking forward, of course, to more trade relations with China. And as Filipino-Chinese, Filipino of Chinese descendants, it's incumbent on our part now that we try to cultivate friendships between our two countries.
Yes, we know that till last year, China has been the Philippines' largest trading partner for 7 consecutive years, and also for EU as well. So let's get back to you, Mr. Dunnett, a bit. So to EU specifically, we know that China exported about 12% more goods to EU countries last year compared with 2021. It has basically remained the same growth level before the COVID-19 pandemic. So according to your observation, what are the respective advantages of economic growth in China and EU, and how can one take advantage of that?
Yeah, no, the EU is an extremely important trading partner for China. 22% of EU's imports come from China. We are its largest export market, and it makes good sense. The EU, you're talking about the advantages. The EU is the world's largest single market. And therefore, Chinese companies can benefit from that. They can export to 27 member states, and they have the clarity and the assurance that no matter where they export, they're going to have the same rules and regulations in terms of exporting into that market. On the other hand, European companies are also very eager to export to China. I wish the same could be said about the export growth that Chinese companies have experienced into Europe. Europe needs to do a little bit better, and China needs to bring down some of its tariff import rates and some of it open up its markets a little bit more. So hopefully that we can be exporting a little bit more to a higher level to flatten out the trade deficit that we have. But let's be sure we've got a very, very strong trading relationship, and we have to look after it and boost it, as well as the investment relationship as well.
Yeah, you mentioned to help China to further open up its market. What are some of your suggestions?
Well, China has made a number of remarkable reforms, obviously last 20 years, 10 years as well, particularly the opening of the interliner shipping in Shanghai. That was one of the international relay, was one of the most recent openings that it's made. Obviously, we would like to ensure that European shipping companies can have the same access to the Chinese market that the Chinese shippers can have in the EU. That's something that's developing, and we'd like to see that move forward. In terms of carbon markets, that's an area where obviously there's a lot of synergies between the EU and China. We both have similar goals for addressing climate change, and I think there's lessons that can be learned there in terms of ensuring that we've got policies that are complementary to each other, so that both Chinese and European companies can aim to achieve the same carbon neutrality goals, benefiting from both markets in the EU and in China accordingly.
Yeah, and we know that many governments have also taken initiative to encourage foreign trade. So, Mr. Xu, what function does the government play? And in the process of going overseas, what else do you think can the government do? Oh, Mr. Xu Hongcai, let's get to you.
I think he has
Can
to
you hear
unmute.
me, Mr. Xu Hongcai?
Sorry. Thank you for your question. In my opinion, the local government should play an active role in the going overseas to grab order. Firstly, I suggest that China local government ask Chinese embassies and consulates to help them to understanding overseas government policy and market needs, and introduce important native customer, market intermediary, and financial institutions. By organizing various forms of exhibition and promotion action, expand external image publicity so that overseas customers can have more understanding of Chinese enterprises and local economic development in China, especially the potential of the cooperation with China and the policy adapted to improve the business environment so as to reduce the cost of the information communication and the cost of making deal. That is my proposal.
Yeah, just like what you said. So now, as China eased its COVID restrictions, its major cities are also trying to revitalize their economies as they pass the peaks of the respective COVID-19 situations. So, Mr. Von Schirach, in your opinion, what sectors in China have the potentials to take the lead in its economic recovery?
Well, look, here from the perspective of where I am in Washington, D.C., we cannot fail to point out that the perspective of U.S.-China economic relations is affected greatly by the political environment. If we look at economics disjointed from politics, obviously the opportunities are enormous. America and China are enormous business partners. America imports the vast majority of consumer products and more from China to this day. But unfortunately, instead, this being viewed as a positive that one should build upon is viewed as negative, as a how can I say, as an American weakness and fragility that exposes the U.S. to dependence on Chinese imports. So here's the real problem. Of course, if we look at sectors, there are so many that in which American firms and Chinese firms could cooperate. Energy, renewable energy, medical research, space research, automotive. I mean, there are so many sectors in which the two economies could bring along synergistic developments. But I'm afraid that at this time, there is a political climate that is most unfavorable. In fact, if anything, if one looks at the presidential directive that was issued last year, early on in the Biden administration's term, the effort was about diminishing dependence on China-based supply chains. This is what is happening right now. And therefore, unless the political obstacles are successfully removed, it will be very difficult to improve upon what has been traditionally a very, very significant, for the last 30 years, economic and trade relationship between the United States and China.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the Biden administration has still been tightening many restrictions on Chinese companies, but there's still much room for cooperation opportunities. What are some new opportunities that you will look at between the two countries that may be prioritized in 2023?
Honestly, I think there are very few of them, because there are so many deals that will be restricted on national security grounds. If Chinese companies want to invest in the very vast and diverse tech sector in the United States, from computer chips and components to other telecommunications, electronics, to anything else, to other components that go in industrial sectors and what have you, they will find immediately a very, very deep scrutiny by the U.S. authorities that are most likely going to block these deals and say, no, can't do that, because this would mean a technology transfer to China of very important, trade secrets and what have you, and we cannot afford to do this on national security grounds. Therefore, honestly, right now, the future doesn't look good for deepening and broadening economic relations, particularly if it comes to Chinese direct investment in U.S. sectors. I mean, there was a time, this was a few years ago, but just to give you the extremes, that a Chinese company that wanted to invest in an American food processing facility that makes ham, and say, can't do that, because otherwise, if we do that, the Chinese will control the American pork market, and that represents a threat. I mean, that's kind of absurd, if you wish. But this is kind of the length that they're going to protect the American economy from what is an alleged Chinese threat. So I repeat, the opportunities in principle are great. America is the largest, the European Union certainly is the largest market, but this is a country. The European Union is not a country. And therefore, we have the largest integrated market, the deepest financial sector, a vibrant stock market. So there's all sorts of possibilities to invest in the United States. I mean, Denmark is a big major investment in the United States. So is the Netherlands. Small country in Europe is the second or third largest investor in the United States. Imagine that, the Netherlands, okay, yeah. European country. And yet China is way at the bottom of the scale, because, and again, the restrictions are political. They are not economic. It's not about lack of opportunity or lack of interest, but there is certainly, right now a headwind, a powerful headwind, which is political.
If I may, maybe I can just add to what Mr. Von Schirach has been saying. Let's be honest, when we talk about EU-China relations and US-China relations, the political element certainly comes up first. I just came back from Brussels. I was there for 2 weeks with a very large delegation of business people, and I was very nervous going in there, because I knew the first questions we were going to get were going to be about the political climate. The good news is as Mr. Von Schirach was saying, the economic potential is huge there, and at least in Europe, officials there very clearly understand the difference between the economic potential and the political climate. So that's not to say that we shouldn't underestimate the impact that the political climate can have on the business environment. And as the other panelist was just saying here right now, there is a real risk that officials exaggerate the situation, and a number of good investments get blocked as a result of heightened tensions between China and the rest of the world. What I think is important, though, is that we communicate to both from my organization, we communicate to the Chinese authorities what we have experienced in Europe, and we can communicate to the European authorities as well what we see here on the ground. And the economic potential is still large, and although there are real risks, most investments do go through. There were over 1,000 investments in the EU from Chinese companies in the last year, and 99% of them, 98% of them, they all go through. Perhaps there's some negotiations, perhaps there's some sort of things that need to be reviewed before they go through. But let's not exaggerate the situation on the one hand, and on the other, let's make sure that we address the issues where they exist, whether it's regards to protectionism or national security or market access. Let's make sure that we make the most out of this real economic miracle that China has produced and can continue to deliver to the global community.
Yeah, just like what Mr. Dunnett said, even under these pressure and also those sanctions, Chinese entrepreneurs also still have the fighting spirit to go abroad and to thrive. So in over 4 decades after China's reform and opening up, at the beginning, China only had a few companies going abroad. But now China is ranked among the top 3 in the world in terms of foreign direct investment for over 10 consecutive years now. So Mr. Xu, let's get to you. What's your understanding of this Chinese fighting spirit? And is this where the power of the Chinese economy comes from?
I think it's muted.
Oh, Mr. Xu Hongcai, let's get to you.
Sorry. In my opinion, in China's traditional philosophy, the fighting spirit means that people's subjective efforts should play an important role in promoting economic growth. In the face of new challenge, the central government requires the officials at all levels to take their responsibility. Yeah, there is a kind of 躺平主义 that is lying down phenomenon in reality. I think this negative kind of pessimism looking ahead to the new year. Although the global economy is still on downward trajectory, the global inflationary pressure is slowing down. The economic policy certainty in the major economy is rising, and the level of systemic financial risk is declining. Especially in China, the market expects its economy is recovering strongly. Recently, the International Monetary Fund raised the expectation of China's economic growth by 0.8 percentage point to 5.2%. The contribution of the Chinese economy to world economic growth will reach 25% this year. In addition, China will continue to adhere to the reform and opening up, encourage the development of private economy, and will implement a more proactive fiscal policy to promote economic growth. In this context, I think private entrepreneurs should follow the trend and seize the opportunity to promote their business development. That is my suggestion, my idea.
What do you think are the key factors that drive China's economic growth, Mr. Xu?
In China, last year, the Chinese economy has withstood more than expected internal and external challenge, and realized the GDP growth of 3%, which is not easy and reflects the great resilience of the Chinese economy. In the new year, China will still face the triple pressure of shrinking demand, supply shock, and weaker expectation. In accordance with the requirements of Central Economic Work Conference last year, the more efforts should be made to promote economic normalization and maintain the stability of economic growth, employment, and inflation, among which expanding domestic demand is the main task. In the coming year, as the world growth slows down, the external demand of Chinese economy will be weak. Therefore, investment will play the key role in economic growth, and consumption will play the basic role in economic stability. More government funds should be invested in people's livelihood and high-tech sector, and the economic policy should guide the active participation of private capital and create a better business environment to track the FDI. Activating the house market will be a top priority. At the same time, we should encourage the development of small and medium-sized enterprises, expand employment opportunity, increase residents' income, and create a better consumer market environment. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of remaining economic stability, in the first 11 months of last year, China's foreign direct investment still grew by over 5% compared with the same period in 2021. This is really not easy to achieve amid the pandemic, and Chinese delegations are trying hard to gain more orders abroad. Mr. Dunnett, what is your advice for these companies, and in what areas do they need to improve?
Well, if China's looking to attract more investment, first of all, the best advice I can offer them is to make sure that they serve well the companies that are already here. Companies looking to invest in China, one of the first things they're going to do is look to see how their counterparts and their competitors are doing in China already. So if European companies are doing well in China, most of which actually are, then that is a very positive sign for other European companies that are looking to invest here. Unfortunately, I think China's punching way below its belt in terms of what it could attract in terms of investment. European investment has actually been falling. The peak was around 2015. And indeed, European companies are actually investing more in the US than they are in China. 1 year of investment in the US is equivalent to all of what EU has invested in China over the last 20 years. So there's a hell of a lot more investment that should be made in China, but we need to have the right political environment for that to happen. But I am confident that the market is here, and assuming that with strong leadership and a return to the predictable environment that we had in the past, that companies will come back here again.
So in the EU, which business areas are relatively more welcoming for Chinese investments?
Well, the EU is one of the most open environments, business environments in the world. Predictability, rule of law. Chinese companies are now investing at the same level as European companies are investing in China. We've got about the same level of investment flows year over year. Chinese investment has also decreased, though, I should say, in the last few years as well. But Chinese companies most recently, they've been investing in consumer goods. There was a purchase of Philips Home Appliances, which was a big success for a Hong Kong company last year. Costco is heavily invested in ports all throughout Europe. Again, something that European companies would like to be able to do here in China. In terms of solar panels and wind energy, China's making its contribution, a strong contribution to fighting climate change. So many sectors, chemicals and auto alike, many Chinese companies actually have realized, because of overcapacity in China in a number of sectors, that they are best place to go abroad now. And again, the predictability of the single market in the EU is very reassuring for them.
Yeah, and especially in recent years, like digital economy, low carbon industry, and also financial services are some new driving forces of trade cooperation between China and the EU. So what are some new opportunities that you have observed in these relatively more high-end sectors?
Yeah, well, financial services is another good point. We were talking earlier about the advantages of chambers of commerce, and one of the things that we do is we advocate for trade agreements, for investment agreements, and in the last few years we did sign a geographical indicators agreement with China, which allows food and beverage companies to take advantage of having their names being well recognized in each other's markets. In terms of financial services, there was an agreement in the last 2 years to have a taxonomy of terms that recognizes what is to be considered green finance in both markets. So for companies looking to invest in qualified green financial investments, we now have mutual recognition of what those are in both economies. So lots of small but important and significant developments that are happening here, and they're happening in the green space and the financial space as well.
And what about Mr. Lin, or what about in the Philippines? What are some areas that are more welcoming to Chinese investors and companies?
Actually, during the last trip of our president to China, they have this kind of durian diplomacy. China has been importing a lot of durian from Thailand, maybe $4 billion worth, and the Philippines would like to at least export around $1 or $2 billion of durian. Again, it will take 5 years now for durian to grow, so I think there will be a lot of Chinese investors coming over to the Philippines to set up durian plantation. As the Philippines already one of the largest exporter of bananas already to China, there's a lot of other potentials of Philippine fruits. Like our mango is one of the best in the world, and we are also looking over for the 120 to 150 million Chinese tourists that goes out of the country every year. And as I said, now the Philippines has 7,100 islands. It's all open to the Chinese tourists also. And if there will be Chinese investors who would like to also invest in our tourism industries, we are welcome them to set up more hotels. And all of these things that we are looking at now. Of course, the Federation, we are very flexible, and we are here to help the Chinese investors when they want to set up business here. And another thing is that the Philippines also, it's very unfortunate, but it's still a good thing that we were able to export a lot of, workers to other countries, because the Philippines is one of the world's, most, what do you call that, English-speaking countries, and we speak English. Even small children, as 5 to 6 years old, can speak English already, so the literacy is very high. And we have one of the best workers. And our average age is only 23 years old, so we have a very young workforce. And then we can also even export. We have been exporting a lot of, nurses, health workers, and many other workers to the Middle East, to Europe. I think, as you can see, that maybe half of the nurses across the United States and European countries are nurses from the Philippines. So these are the things that we're looking at. And yes, and last year, in spite of the pandemic, the Philippine GDP grew by 7.6%, and we are looking forward to at least achieving the same kind of growth this year. So we are very happy, and we are very, in spite of some tensions in the South China Sea, but then again, according to our president, that will not really affect the relationship, especially trade relations between our two countries.
And I know that you are also an expert in the hybrid rice sector. What are some new cooperation between China and the Philippines in the agricultural sector? Does the technology from China still needs the demand in Philippines?
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned hybrid rice technology. We are proud that our company in the Philippines also is one that was actually anointed by Professor Lin Yuqing to be the first to develop a tropical hybrid rice in the Philippines. So we are very happy that we were able to fulfill the wishes of Professor Lin Yuqing. And right now, the tropical hybrid rice has been promulgated in for many countries, even as far as Bangladesh, India, Myanmar, even Indonesia and Vietnam, and even as far as Africa, Nigeria and Ghana, and also Papua New Guinea. And we are at this point in time that there is really a food shortage as far as climate change is concerned. So we really have to look at producing more agricultural products per hectare of land. That's what China has been doing in the past so many years.
And also in China, as major cities pass their peaks in terms of COVID cases, many local governments are also trying to revitalize their economies. Mr. Xu, what would be your advice for Chinese local governments in order to achieve sustainable growth?
As we all know, China's local governments have played a unique role in promoting economic development. Generally speaking, the combination of active government and an active market is an important way to promote economic growth. For example, local governments want to attract more funds and more investment projects to land in the local area. Through preferential policy and a better business environment. Moreover, there will be face competition between local governments in different regions. One popular phrase of local government official is to turn comparative advantage into competitive advantage. Therefore, if a local government wants to promote the sustainable high-quality development of the local economy, it must have a clear understanding of the local resource endowment and industry advantage, and persuade more private and foreign enterprises to invest and start business in the local area by improving the image, publicity. Local government officials are keen on 招商引资, that is attracting investment, especially hoping to bring over some of the famous leading companies. The central and western region in China welcome the industry transferred from the southeast coastal area. And the government is also willing to provide preferential policy, such as tax relief and financing support, to incubate and support the development of micro, small, and medium-sized companies.
Yes, just like what Mr. Xu said, 招商引资, attracting more investment. Now still, the U.S. market is still China's very large market. In a time of tension between China and the U.S., bilateral cooperation has also been a very hot topic. And if you look at the data, as of November 2022, the total imports and exports between China and the U.S. reached the highest level in history. But just like Mr. Schirach just said earlier, that the Biden administration is still tightening many restrictions on Chinese companies. Let me get to you, Mr. Schirach. What aspects do you think Chinese companies can work on to win more orders from the U.S.?
Well, look, it's very, as I said before, the overarching problem here is not economic, which is our topic here in this discussion, but is political. And I'm afraid that is so significant at this time to cloud and frankly to poison the atmosphere regarding additional trade, investment, cooperation, mergers and acquisitions, direct investment, and what have you. Just to give you a practical illustration of how things unfortunately are going in the wrong direction from this perspective, or at least in an opposite direction. Now that the Republicans have gained a majority, slim majority, in the House of Representatives in the United States after the last November midterm elections, they have announced the creation of an ad hoc special committee to investigate U.S.-China relations, to look more deeply into issues and problems and potentially threats that come from China to the United States. As you can see, this adds to the negatives in terms of the atmosphere that already exists. You may recall that even during the Trump administration, there was a really major issue with tariffs against China, accused of having too much of a trade surplus with the United States. An agreement was reached in early 2020, in January, but then the COVID pandemic exploded and the whole thing fell apart. And so the gains that were supposed to be achieved, mostly in Chinese commitments to buy additional American products, particularly agricultural products and the like, that didn't materialize. And so here we are. I think that there is the potential, we all agree, is enormous. But if anything, on the American side, there is a deliberate, open, transparent effort to diminish reliance on Chinese imports, to diversify supply chains, which are now China-centric for the American electronics industry. Everybody knows, you look at any American tech product, consumer product, Apple, iPhones, computers, peripherals, whatever, they're all made in China, or at least assembled in China from components that come to China from various other countries in the region. This is considered now a fragility, something that America should not have, that this is dangerous. Whether this political judgment is correct or not, it doesn't matter. People may be mistaken, they may exaggerate this Chinese threat. There was essentially open warfare waged against Huawei, right? We know that story. And basically forbid Huawei from doing business in the United States, prevent Huawei to purchase components for its own telecom products from the United States. And it goes on and on. There are concerns about the pharmaceutical industry in America that depends on fundamental inputs for antibiotics or other key medications coming from China. There is the issue of American dependence on rare earth minerals that are absolutely essential for the future green energy, batteries, and what have you. So in other words, I regret to say this, but the negatives at this point overwhelm any possible bright side of hope. For more than 30 years, American multinational corporations were absolutely on top of the race, if you wish, to go to China. Say, oh my God, look at that. There is a market, more than 1 billion people. Let's go there. Let's put Starbucks. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's sell American products. Let's make American cars in China. And all that actually did take place. But now there is an effort to pull back. And as the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, has said, well, we should stop outsourcing. We should do friend-shoring or inshoring, meaning bring production back to the continental US, or if that's not possible, shift from China that we believe are more friendly to the United States, whether it's in Europe or Japan or South Korea or elsewhere. So this is highly problematic at this point, and I'm not sure that I can see, the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. I hope there will be. There is no reason for this. The two largest economic powers in the world. Again, the EU obviously is bigger, but it's not technically it's not a country. But it's these are the major protagonists of the world economy. If they would cooperate on a good basis, on a transparent basis, this would be fantastic. But I also mentioned recent developments, which I'm sure you're aware of. There was a threat of delisting Chinese companies from the American Stock Exchange because, according to American regulators, the Security Exchange Commission, Chinese companies don't comply with American standards of disclosure and governance, and therefore either they would provide all the information that is required according to American rules, or they would be delisted. They cannot do business in the United States, and we could go on and on and on the negatives, and I don't want to pile on, in what seems like a litany of horrors here. But unless this political impasse is overcome, successfully, I really believe that the prospects for increased ties between economic and investment ties between the two countries look at this time very, very poor. That doesn't mean things cannot change. The world moves on and the future is open, and this bad moment can be overcome probably. But at this time, I think the negatives are overwhelming, and politically speaking, here in Washington, I can tell you that there's a great deal of pessimism about how U.S.-China bilateral relations are going to evolve. And this does not create the good foundations of confidence and optimism for firms, American firms, who say, oh, let's look at China. Let's see what's going on there. Let's go do business there. I think that's not going to happen in the near future. And by the same token, there'll continue to be many roadblocks, whether legitimate or not, for Chinese companies that want to invest in the United States. Even one major bright side, to conclude, that has been there for years, the number of Chinese students coming to American university, the largest number for any country in the world, Chinese students coming to America. Why? Because they think they can take advantage of the American, higher education institutions. But even that is now looked at with some suspicion. There is fear that, and I know this may not sound credible to people in China, but that, Chinese students may be enlisted as essentially intelligence officers, gathering information and other things to be sent back to China to the detriment of American industry, trade secrets, and what have you. So whichever aspect we'll look at, I'm afraid we are seeing headwinds that unless the political environment will be improved substantially, will continue to prevent this potential economic relationship to come to full fruition.
And Mr. Dunnett, it seems that you have something to say. Do you agree with what Mr. Paolo said? And what do you think can China do to further expand its overseas markets under these tensions and many sanctions?
I think what he said is extremely sobering, and he articulated a number of very good examples in many different sectors where there have been blockages, some of them reasonable and understandable, and others you'd sort of say, what risk is there in purchasing a pork farm? What risk is there in purchasing some renewable energy? Like I said earlier, the potential is much greater than the risks involved. We issued a report, the European Chamber, on decoupling just 3 years ago. At that time, nobody was talking about that. People said we were fear-mongering by using such a term. Now it's used every day in papers around the world. What's interesting, though, is I want to go back to, again, what I was saying earlier is about not, hopefully not exaggerating the situation. We want to make sure people are aware of what's going on, the conversations that are happening in capitals and boardrooms around the world. We don't see full decoupling happening from China, but there's a new term that we're using. It's called de-risking. And all of those examples along the supply chain where companies have potential risks, whether it's because of active pharmaceutical ingredients or rare earths or certain types of technology or blockages, or because of the vertical integration of many SOEs in China where they could be blocked out along the way of doing business here, companies are looking at how they can de-risk. And for some of them, that means developing their own supply chain just for China. Because let's be clear, it's not just the US. China also is looking at self-sufficiency and indigenous innovation and autonomous developments. And so, again, the market here is significant. China knows it as well. European American companies want to be here, but the costs of being here is becoming more and more expensive for them. And so they have to make a decision. We invest in China to take advantage of the Chinese market, but in the process, we're going to incur more costs as a result. And for some of them, they reach a tipping point, and it's going to be too much, and they're going to have to withdraw from the Chinese market. And we've seen that already. If you look at the falling investment that I've already mentioned of EU investment coming into China, it's coming from a much smaller group of companies. About 80% of EU investment in China comes from only 10 companies. It's because these are the big top 10 companies that have made such huge investments, that have a decent market share, that they're able to continue, and they have to continue to invest to grow. But for many others, it's just become too risky for them. What I will say, though, maybe two more things. One is we need to be practical. On areas where we can't work together, okay, fine. Let's say what they are. Let's have discussions around it. And if we can't, that's fine. But on areas where I've mentioned earlier on financial cooperation, on the environment and climate change, and a number of healthcare issues, I mean, the global pandemic that we saw with COVID-19, we have to work together on things like that. I mean, that hasn't. We can't ignore that. That is not something that is no longer an issue for us. We need to get vaccines in China. We need to get people vaccinated. We need to be sharing intelligence and information. I mean, these are people's lives that are at stake. And maybe just to conclude and go back to some of the examples Mr. Xu was talking about, you asked him the question about, what can local governments do and all that. On the one hand, we preach and we share the message that Mr. Von Schirach was talking about, because it does cloud it. Politics does affect business, very much so here in China. But at the same time, we see huge potential. And so we're writing reports, and we're launching a Shanghai local position paper and a Tianjin local position paper in the coming weeks that highlights the possibilities and the investment opportunities and reform opportunities that can still take place at a local level here, and which we think European companies still have a very strong interest in.
Yes, we hope that with the fighting spirit of Chinese entrepreneurs on all these new opportunities to go abroad, Chinese companies can reach new highs in 2023 and expand their businesses in more and more countries. Thank you guys so much for joining us to have this very candid and very insightful discussion. I'm Juju from CGTN. See you next time. Bye for now.